Midnight did not simply arrive on the high desert, it descended, heavy and watchful, as if the land itself were holding its breath. The wind slipped through the sagebrush like a whispered warning, carrying with it the scent of dust, cold stone, and something older than memory. Elias Crowley tightened his coat as he guided his horse along the narrow trail bordering his ranch. He had lived on this land for 12 years, long enough to know when the night felt wrong. Tonight, the darkness pressed closer than usual, and the moon hung thin and pale, like a blade dulled by time. That was when he heard it, a sound, soft, fractured, almost lost beneath the wind. Not the cry of an animal, not the call of a coyote. It was human, a gasp, a breath pulled painfully through lungs that had almost given up. Elias dismounted, heart thudding hard in his chest. He followed the sound toward the dry ravine that cut through the edge of his property, a place avoided by locals who claimed the ground there remembered blood. As he descended, his lantern light caught something unnatural against the dark earth. White, not bone, not cloth, hair, long, silver-white hair spread like spilled moonlight over the rocks. She lay there broken and unmoving, her skin pale as frost, her lashes so light they nearly vanished against her cheeks. At first glance, Elias thought she was dead. Then her fingers twitched. She was an Apache woman. He knew that instantly from the beaded leather at her wrist, the faint markings at her temples, but unlike any Apache he had ever seen. Her albinism made her seem unreal, a spirit torn from legend and left bleeding in the dust. Blood darkened the stones beneath her, a cruel contrast to her ghostly beauty. Elias knelt beside her, hesitation burning through him. Helping her could bring consequences. Apache territory disputes were old, sharp wounds in this land's history. But leaving her here would mean death. And something in her face, in the quiet defiance even unconsciousness could not erase, commanded him. "Easy," he whispered, though she could not hear him. He wrapped her carefully in his coat and lifted her into his arms. She was lighter than she should have been, like someone already halfway gone. The ride back to the ranch felt endless. Every shadow looked like a pursuer. Every sound carried the weight of judgment. Elias did not know it yet, but the moment he chose to save her, the land itself had shifted beneath his feet. He laid her on his bed, cleaned her wounds with shaking hands, and worked through the night by lantern light. She never screamed, never cried out, only breathed, shallow and stubborn, as if refusing to surrender. Once near the edge of dawn, her eyes fluttered open. They were not brown or black, but red-tinted amber, reflecting the firelight like embers. She looked at him, not with fear, but with recognition. "You should not have," she whispered in a voice thin as smoke. Before Elias could ask her name, before he could even answer, she slipped back into unconsciousness. Outside, the sky began to pale. By sunrise, she was awake again, sitting upright despite the pain that should have crippled her. She studied the room, the rough wooden walls, the rifle above the door, the dust-worn boots by the bed. Finally, her gaze settled on Elias. "My name is Ishala," she said, "and my mother will come." Elias frowned. "Your family?" She nodded once. "The matriarch." The word carried weight, power, warning. Less than an hour later, the ground began to tremble, not with violence, but with purpose. Horses approached, dozens of them. Elias stepped outside and saw them crest the ridge like a living tide. Apache riders, faces stern, eyes sharp. At their center rode a woman older than the rest, her posture unbent by time, her presence commanding silence. She dismounted slowly and walked toward Elias without fear. "I am Nante," she said, "mother of Ishala, keeper of our blood." Elias swallowed. "She's alive. She's safe." Nante's eyes flicked past him, toward the house, and for the briefest moment, something like relief crossed her face. Then it hardened into resolve. "You saved my daughter," she said. "For that a debt is owed." Elias exhaled, thinking the danger had passed. Then Nante raised her hand and pointed, not at him, but at the land. "By sunrise," she declared, "your ranch is claimed." The wind rose again, carrying her words across the fields Elias had worked with his own hands. The home he had built plank by plank. He opened his mouth to protest, to demand explanation, But the matriarch's gaze silenced him. "This land sits on a crossing older than your fences," Nante continued. "You stepped into our fate when you lifted my daughter from death. Now you will stand in it." Behind her, Ishala appeared in the doorway, wrapped in his coat, her pale hair glowing in the morning sun. Their eyes met, his full of confusion, hers full of something far more dangerous. Gratitude and something deeper. Fate had arrived with the dawn. The moment Nante's words settled over the land, silence swallowed everything. The horses stood still. The riders waited. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, as if the desert itself was listening for Elias Crowley's answer. His ranch, his life's work, had been claimed in a single sentence, spoken as calmly as one might claim a forgotten heirloom. "You can't just take it," Elias finally said, his voice steady but tight. "This land is legally mine." Nante turned her gaze toward him, slow and unblinking. "Law," she replied, "is a young thing. This land remembers older promises." She gestured toward the hills beyond the fence line. "Before your papers, before your names, before even our wars, this ground was marked, a crossing of bloodlines and futures. Your ranch sits at its heart." Elias laughed once sharply. "You're saying this is some kind of legend?" Ishala stepped forward then, her bare feet touching the dust as if it recognized her. Though weak, she stood tall, her pale skin glowing against the rising sun. "It is not legend," she said softly. "It is awaiting." Nante nodded. "My daughter was born different so she could be seen by the spirits. Albino blood is rare among us, but it is never meaningless. Ishala was marked at birth to return here." Elias looked between them. "And where do I fit into this?" Nante's eyes hardened. "You already chose." She raised her hand, and one of the warriors brought forward a bundle, old, worn leather wrapped around something heavy. Nante opened it and revealed a stone marker, carved with symbols that seemed to shift when Elias stared too long. "This stone was placed here generations ago," she said. "It bound a promise. When the white-skinned daughter of our blood would be saved by a man of this land, the keeper of that land would face a choice." Ishala's voice dropped to a whisper. "Join or lose everything." The truth struck Elias harder than any threat. This was not conquest. It was inheritance. "You don't want the ranch," he said slowly. "You want me." Nante smiled, not kindly but knowingly. "You saved my daughter without knowing who she was, without asking reward. That tells me the land chose well." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Stay, learn, protect this crossing with us. The ranch remains, but not as it was. Refuse, and you will walk away alive but empty. The land will never answer to you again." Elias turned toward his house, the porch he built, the fence he repaired every winter, the soil he bled into. Then he looked at Ishala. Her red-amber eyes held no command, only truth. "If I stay," he asked her, "is this your will?" She nodded once. "I was saved at midnight," she said. "You were claimed at sunrise. Neither of us escapes this." The riders waited. Elias drew a long breath. "Then I stay." The desert exhaled. Nante lifted the stone marker and pressed it into the earth at the edge of the ranch. "From this moment," she declared, "the crossing is awake." Ishala stepped beside Elias, her shoulder brushing his. "This land will test you," she said quietly. "So will my people." He met her gaze.
"I'm still here."
For the first time she smiled, not as a wounded girl, but as a future